Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show for your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. That's 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show for your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. And we're very fortunate on this show to have some of the best world-class athletes on the show across a broad range of sports. We've had footballers, coaches, people who work in the field of sport, from coaching right through to analysts, psychologists. We've also had a segment, and we have a segment that we feature. We interview some of the most leading professionals in the field of mental health and psychology, giving us an insight into their research, which has been really, really fascinating. Today we have a really fascinating guest who is a researcher as well as a world-class athlete, and no doubt she'll give us more of an insight into what she does, what it's like to compete at the very highest level, and get an idea of what her research entails. So Gemma Bridge, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board, and I suppose if we can start, Gemma, with your research. You recently being awarded a doctorate at Leeds Beckett. Tell us a bit about more what your research consisted of.
Okay, sure. So my PhD was looking at the UK soft drinks industry levy, or sugar tax, and my main focus with that was looking at the organisations that were advocating for or supporting that policy, and also the organisations that were arguing against it. And it used lots of different methods. With kind of my main focus was looking at social media and newspapers. So that is where my kind of interest lies, in communication of policies and health.
And what did you find? Like, I know that you worked really hard to do that, but what were some of the findings that you can share with our listeners? I think it's really fascinating area of research, but if you can tell us some of the things that sort of, some of the things that you sort of come up with the research.
Sure. So, as I said, I kind of used lots of different methods, but I think some of the most interesting findings were from the social media study. So I did a social network analysis. And that looked at the different actors that were involved in the debates. So I looked at Twitter, which was particularly interesting because that's not really something that's been considered in policy debates as yet. So lots of people have looked at how people debate on TV and how people debate in newspapers, but social media has kind of been forgotten. So I think that was particularly interesting for me as a finding.
Yeah, absolutely, and what I mean, it's really interesting you say, and obviously social media, these days is huge, and it's becoming more and more influential as every day goes by. Really, there's so much of it's growing as well. I mean, what are your thoughts around sort of social media and sort of Twitter in the context of your research?
Sure. So I think it's becoming more and more evident that social media is a platform for debate. It's a platform where people can get their voices heard, which is great. But it's also a platform where some voices, particularly maybe the voices that shouldn't be heard so much, are able to be heard. And for example, there's quite an issue with bots, where automated accounts that are run by people or by computers are able to kind of infiltrate these debates and shape them in ways that we may not be aware of. So I think for research and for life, that is something that we need to be aware of. And there's also echo chambers where we are presented with information that kind of correlates with what we're thinking and what we're liking, which is good because it's our interest areas, but it also means that we're not exposed to other people's opinions or other debates that could open up our eyes to kind of the things that are happening in the world and not just in our little spheres of interest. I
mean, that's, you make a really interesting point there, and I suppose with social media it's really easy to sort of, think that the world exists. The world that is, it's people, I suppose, in a way, solipsism really. We kind of sort of start to think that our circle of friends or followers, or whatever they call them these days on social media, is the world around us. And do you think it's important, Gemma, to break away as well from social media? I know it's outside probably the scope of your research, but do you think it's important to sort of break away from social media and sort of get out there and experience the big wide world as it is outside that perimeter?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, inside my research, I was very, very aware that social media and newspapers and TV are all just one space. So it was important for me during my research to investigate these different platforms.
Wow.
And then in life, as an athlete as well, I definitely think it's important to take yourself away from from social media and just from screens in general, because it is just one platform and one space, and it isn't necessarily very healthy to be stuck in that space or on your phone all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying, and I found as well too, Gemma, that there's some people who you sort of from social media, they're so different to what they are when you meet them in person. If that sort of makes any sense, where it's almost a different identity, a different persona. Yeah. Do you not think so? Or?
Definitely. I mean, I think being online, you can have a completely different persona. So that is good for people that may struggle with social interaction in real, in everyday life because of insecurities or anxiety or whatever. But I think it's also quite easy to present an opinion that may be quite controversial in face-to-face situations online, because you haven't got that backlash, and you can kind of just turn your phone off, turn your computer off, and just be who you want to be. But I think that can be dangerous in certain debates, for sure.
And what motivated you to do the research, Jim? What was sort of the motivation behind your sort of decision to sort of go into that sort of to do that research?
Sure. So, my background is in exercise physiology, health promotion, and nutrition, and I was really interested in that area. But I felt that where I was almost working to, if you take the analogy of a river, I was almost taking people out of the river by acting on those downstream factors, so the person. Yeah. And I was really interested to be able to kind of figure out what was happening further upstream, to see how the people were falling in that river. So I wanted to do something or investigate an area, for example, health policy, that has a more upstream approach, so it enables changes for everybody and not just for those people that are kind of struggling, downstream. Yeah. So, yeah.
And sort of where do you see the research going forward? I mean, sort of, what do you see moving forward? What's sort of your vision around the research?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the sugar levy or the sugar tax it's moving every day, and there's quite a lot of research going on evaluating it as a policy. But I think it is just one aspect. For population health to improve, we need to be working together. We need to be looking at other policies and other approaches that can make changes for everybody, because obviously soft drinks is just one aspect of health, but there's physical activity, there's all the other foods and drinks. So I think this research is very much just one part of a much bigger investigation. So moving forward, I'd like to look at other things, investigate things from different perspectives, and again, definitely focus on the communication and the health communication advocacy side of things.
I mean, you mentioned there about sort of soft drinks and you mentioned there about sort of healthy lifestyle and your sort of background in exercise physiology. Sort of moving forward from there, how much, I know sort of it might be outside the scope again, but how much of an impact do you think it has on people in terms of, I suppose, many people have been in that situation before. I've certainly been in it myself, where it's kind of like a spiral where we sort of eat the wrong foods and maybe don't exercise as much as we should do, and sometimes it sort of can be difficult to break out of that situation we're in. But in terms of people's well-being, do you see it as a well-being thing to be able to sort of eat well and exercise and sort of get out there and be in the outdoors as well?
No, definitely. I mean, I think it's important to realise that we live in an environment that is obesogenic, which means that the environment we live in makes it very, very hard to choose the healthier option. So it's not the individual's fault that they may be selecting the chocolate bar on the way to the till, because the chocolate bar is right there. So I think that's one thing. It's not about blaming the individual. So what we need to do is work together to make the healthier choice the easier choice. And that also means that in our cities and in our towns, if cycle lanes don't exist, then cycling becomes harder. So it's making this joined up approach to try and make everything easier and also safer, so that we can all be choose the healthier option, and we're able to have the capacity to go out and be active and get outside, which I think is really important now more than ever.
Absolutely, and I suppose, but some of the challenges as well, Gemma, with that is that the options out there, like you've mentioned there, obviously the advertising campaigns, and now you've got social media as well, where people sort of see and you've got these sort of creative advertising campaigns, and people sometimes, I don't want to sort of, sort of single out any sort of products. There's a lot of them out there, but they sort of believe that some of these products are actually good for them. But when you read the ingredients, it suggests otherwise. And for the general person who doesn't have a background like yourself, it can be very hard to sort of distinguish what's nutrition and what isn't. Do you not think so?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think for me, as an athlete and also as just a general person, I try and choose the foods that are most kind of as they would be, if you know what I mean. So like a carrot over a packet of crackers, or a potato over chips, or a slice of meat over a processed sausage, those kind of things. So trying to keep things as simple as possible. But I completely appreciate that things are really complicated and confusing, and I think there's so much processed food out there. It's very, very hard to always pick that healthier option. But at the same time, it's definitely not, you don't have to always eat the healthiest thing. You can definitely include some of these sweet treats and these crackers and whatever else you want to eat in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and no doubt there'll be people listening in, and they'll have their own opinions as to what's healthy eating as well, and that's one of the challenges, I think, of social media too. And you only got to look at social media, and one person's got one opinion about what you should eat, and one's got another, and that can be quite challenging as well. Do you not think, in that respect, sometimes social media, a bit of information obviously can get distorted, and so there's so many opinions out there as well, it can be really confusing for the general person?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, I think if you do get stuck in these echo chambers where people have the same opinions as you, then that only exacerbates your perception of what healthy looks like. So I think it's really important to try and get information from people that actually know what they're talking about, not necessarily all influencers or all people on social media have qualifications in nutrition or what healthy living looks like. So I think it's important to remember to ask your GP or your health professional that you speak to try and get some true information about what it is you should be eating. So yeah.
And also, I mean, in this day and age now, you've also got sort of these sort of new products in the market, like genetic, what works with your genes, and I have to admit, I'm not entirely convinced. I don't, this is just my opinion, by the way. I'm not sort of discrediting anybody. I'm just not entirely convinced that we're at that stage where we've got enough research and information to suggest that we eat certain things. I think, generally speaking, when you eat, unless obviously it's some sort of allergy, which is obviously serious and it's a medical thing. But generally, when we eat something, we know if it agrees with us as well. In terms of whether we know. I think, generally speaking, to use an example, Gemma, I juice every day. I sort of make a smoothie every day and throw in all sorts of greens and a little bit of fruit to sort of to help the taste. And after I've had that, I feel really good. Equally, I also 20% of the time eat whatever, and there are times I'll eat something and eat out, and I don't feel as good eating it, if that makes any sense. So I think sometimes the barometer can be just how we feel. Do you not think that can be the case as well? Sometimes we generally know our own body as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I do think though, if you've lived or if you've grown up having a certain food and you've probably not, I mean, I know there's lots of people that probably would never have even had the ability to try a juice. So I mean, there is eating one way, and it's like some people can only afford certain things. So it's about being able to find the food the diet that fits well with your own taste and with your ability to afford it. So there are lots of kind of things to weigh up when you're deciding what to eat, I think. Yeah,
no, you make a good point there about affordability, and so I mean, this is like in my experience an issue around the world, really, in terms of getting access to sort of good food. Pre-COVID, I'd spent a lot of time on the road and sort of traveling with work, for example, and very hard, at least in my experience, to sort of be able to get food that I would I'm not no nutritionist by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously things like sugar and salt and whatever chemicals are in there, it's not always easy, and like you said, also affordable. I mean, this might be outside the scope as well, but what can be done in terms of making it more affordable and accessible to all, really? Can anything be done for that?
I mean, I think it's a tricky thing to consider, and it's a lot of research is going into that space at the moment. But I think things like trying to buy locally and trying to support local farmers and local growing initiatives is really important. And also things like, I mean, the government's not looking at the Children's Holiday Food Fund. I think that was something that was a big mistake that should have been considered, because food and access to healthy food is absolutely crucial to children's health and well-being. So
absolutely,
yeah, I think it's from both from the bottom up, so helping farmers and helping people to grow their own food, and also from the government, so the top down, helping people from the top down to afford food and have access to that healthy food.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a challenge, and sort of, I suppose there's no simple solutions to sort of, complex situations really in that respect. But I'd certainly like to see, and I certainly do everything I can to support local first and foremost. But it's not always as easy as that, because obviously logistically and other things come into it too. And just generally speaking, corporations have they're everywhere really in terms of what they offer.
Definitely.
And that's just that's just the way it is, I guess, at this point. But it doesn't mean it can't change eventually. But I suppose turning our attention to your career as an athlete, you're a world-class athlete in your own right, which is phenomenal, really, in terms of how you've combined your studies with being a world-class athlete. But yourself, where did it begin for you? I mean, you did a scholarship in the States as a runner. You transitioned to walking. Tell us a bit about your career, Gemma. How did it begin in sort of running first and foremost, and your experience in America?
Sure. So, I mean, at school I was kind of one of those children that was trying to find sport, a sport that I could do. So I wasn't particularly sporty. I was very active, but not very sporty. And it wasn't until I was about 14, 15 that I found that I really enjoyed running. Did cross country, and I was running out, with friends and things. And then when I moved to university, so I went to the University of Birmingham, and it's got a pretty good reputation for very good running endurance, especially club and in the university. Yeah. So it was really there that I really picked up running and realised that I could actually be quite good at it. I focused mainly while I was there on the 5,000 metres and the 10,000 metres, and then based on the times I was getting, I was given or offered a scholarship to the US, where I also did a master's. So it was kind of like throughout my undergrad and then master's degrees, I realised that you can combine training and study quite well. So yeah, that was kind of where running came from and where I got to, and then I loved it in the US. But when I returned to the UK, I was kind of a bit at a loss. So I'd lost that kind of, the club nature aspect of things. I did try to kind of go it alone, and I found a couple of other clubs that I could join. But at that point, I was also working full time, so it was just a bit of a challenge to balance everything, and also to kind of have a goal, because that was a bit of a loss. So I looked at alternatives. I'd done a bit of race walking whilst I was at Birmingham. And a coach actually reached out to me and just said, look, I've seen that you're doing some of these longer distance races, so I was doing half marathons. Would you be interested in giving race walking a go? Because we've got the Commonwealth Games coming up, and I think you could do it, and all of that. So that was how race walking came about, and I kind of just gave it a go. And I said to myself, if I could get to Leeds, which at the time was the national centre for race walking for the UK, then I would give it a go. So so that's how it happened.
Yeah, it's incredible how you transition. And what was it like, the transition like, to go from running to race walking? I can imagine it would be, I mean, obviously great insight from the coach, that's for sure. But in terms of making that transition, did you find it challenging in terms of the technique and?
Yeah, so I mean, the technique was definitely a challenge, but I enjoy a challenge, so for me that wasn't a problem. And based on my running training, the actual kind of volume of training was pretty much the same. So it was very much like in the early days when I first started, which was like in 2017. I just literally focused, all I could focus on was training and the technique, and then I ran a lot still to maintain the fitness. And then over the kind of following 6 months, I kind of made the move to focus more on the race walking, cut out some of the running, and then that's how I kind of slowly made the transition across to the new sport.
I mean, it's a pretty sort of quick sort of, I suppose you could call it a meteoric rise in sort of race walking, in the sense that, so you sort of from transitioning in sort of 2017, so to speak, and then to sort of go to the Commonwealth Games, and obviously, was it fifth in the 20k in the Commonwealth Games? And I mean, that didn't take you long to sort of be able to be, really more than competitive, to be one of the front runners, really. Did that sort of, I suppose it wouldn't have surprised you, but did that surprise other people that you sort of managed to do, to sort of transition really quickly and sort of achieve what you did in a short time?
Yeah, I mean, within 6 months of starting, I had been selected for the World Championship. So,
wow.
I mean, that first 6 months was an absolute whirlwind. So I literally, I moved to Leeds in February, and by March I was competing for England, and then by April I was at a European level race, finished in the top 15 there, and then I was kind of getting times that were, were competitive in the world. So yes, I definitely think the first 6 months were pretty impressive. I mean, I surprised myself, definitely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what was it like being at the World Championships? I mean, that would have been a huge stage to be.
Yeah. I mean, it was incredible because it was in London. It was just like everybody was there, and there was like all the music, and there was people everywhere. It was, I mean, for me at the time, it was quite overwhelming because it was the first, really big competition I'd been to, and I had literally been in the sport for 6 months, so it was definitely a whirlwind, but it was an experience that taught me a lot, and it taught me how to kind of act and train and prepare for a massive competition like that.
That's amazing. And also at that point, so were you doing your studies as well? Did you sort of have your research was going on as well, or?
Yes, yeah. Wow. So I started my PhD in 2017 February as well. So wow. They basically started at exactly the same time.
So you're doing a PhD whilst you were in the Commonwealth Games as well? Yes.
I mean, so we went to Australia in March of 2018, and we stayed out there until May 2018 because we had a race in China as well. So we did the Commonwealth, and then we flew to China for a World Team Championship. So it was it was about 8 weeks away, which was nice because it was obviously cool, different places, but it was a little bit of a challenge to balance my work and training around those big competitions too.
That's incredible. And so, I mean, fifth at the Commonwealth Games, obviously it's a great achievement. Were you happy with that, Gemma? Were you sort of looking to medal? I mean, what are your sort of thoughts looking back on things now? It's sure. Obviously, a great achievement. What did you have your sight? If it's okay to ask, what did you sort of set your sights on achieving at the Games? Sure.
I mean, in 2017, I think if I'd continued at that kind of progression rate, I definitely could have been within a chance of medaling. But unfortunately in October of 2017 I picked up a pretty nasty injury. It was just like a chronic tendinopathy in my hamstring, which it wasn't anything that stopped me from doing things day to day, but it made training very painful and very difficult to train at speed. So for me that was definitely a battle that I had to overcome, and it did mean that obviously leading up to the Commonwealth I wasn't training as well as I probably should have been or could have been. So for me, going to the Commonwealth, it was very much just about doing the race, enjoying it, not really worrying too much about how I did in terms of positions. But I was proud that I was able to finish, and finish in the top, the top half of the race was great. So I think the next Commonwealth Games, the next big championships, I'd like to be a bit more competitive, but the people that did medal were definitely the better athletes on the day.
No, that's really interesting stuff, and I think that it's obviously really interesting. Obviously, the build up, and you mentioned there, the injury as well, but you obviously noble in the way your perception of things, and I suppose this year it's obviously been a very challenging year for a lot of people, and it will probably continue to be challenging globally. Moving forward in terms of your own goals, obviously, all things permitting, we've got the Olympics, we've got the games in Birmingham in a couple of years, all things being well. Obviously, at this moment in time, one doesn't really know. But what are your sort of aspirations moving forward as an athlete? Gemma, have you got a lot of unfinished business there? You're sort of going to carry on and see what you can do and how far you can go, or will you sort of focus more on the research? Where do you sort of see yourself going forward?
Yeah, I mean, for me, sport and race walking are really, really important to me and my life. So I'd like to see how I can do. I've trained throughout the whole pandemic. I mean, I think it's been something that's given me that one thing that can, that I can stick to, the routine and the goals that, that maintain, that are there, that aren't going to be taken away. So yes, that's really important. I think in terms of my goals in race walking, I would really love to be able to be considered for the Olympics. And in terms of that, try and get close to the 90-minute mark for the 20k, which would be a British record if I could get close or under that. So that would definitely be a goal. But we'll see. These things, anything can change. It just depends on what happens in the world, really. So
absolutely. Yeah. And how's your training going at the moment, Gemma? How are you getting on with your training? Sort of, have you been getting on with your training over the pandemic?
It's been really good. I've kind of changed up my coaching setup a little bit. So Paul Larson, who's a founder of Hit Science, which is one of the companies I work with, has kind of supported me in a coaching capacity a bit more, which has been really, really great. And he's very holistic in his approach to coaching. So he's helped me to change my diet, work out my sleeping patterns a bit better. Wow. Started doing some meditation, which is something I'd never really considered. So he's been great. And then I've got another coach who actually lives in the UK, and he's supporting me with technique and things, which is, again, with race walking being so technical, he's been great in terms of helping me to iron out some of the more technical issues that I struggle with. So training's been good.
That's really interesting. You mentioned Hit Science there. I mean, you have a role there as well. Can you tell us a bit about what you do in that capacity?
Sure. Yeah. So I started working with Hit Science in November last year, and I work with them in terms of marketing and social media and kind of business strategy, I guess. Hit Science is a company that tries to educate coaches and athletes about high intensity interval training from a scientific point of view, and also from how to actually apply that to the context of sport. So it's given me the capacity to kind of go back to my roots a bit with biology and exercise physiology, whilst also learning myself about how to communicate with different people and how to make complex information easy to digest. So it's great. And
is it like different sports that you cover as well, or are there any specific sports that you focus on?
Yeah, I mean we look at, I think we have 20 different sports. So right from triathlon across to football, from cricket to tennis, swimming to cycling. So we look across the whole spectrum, and we kind of break them down into individual sports and team sports, and then within those we look at more endurance focused and more speed focused. So we cover a wide variety of sports in there.
That's really interesting stuff. And in terms of yourself, Gemma, what's sort of like your overall sort of vision? I mean, you've achieved so much. There would have been a really proud achievement for you to the doctorate, and obviously the games, and you still from speaking to you've got a lot of ambition to move forward. What's sort of your vision in terms of moving forward as an athlete and as a researcher?
Sure. So, I mean, for me, in terms of race walking and sport in general, I'd just love to be able to continue enjoying it, try not to pick up any more injuries, and then, see what I can do in terms of sport. And then in terms of my research, I think my main focus now is about communication of research, about how communication affects people in terms of their behaviours and health, and then also about how to make sure research has a positive impact on the communities that the research is looking at. So those three kind of prongs is where I'd like to focus my energy most.
No, that's great stuff. That's really fascinating. It's been really interesting speaking to you. Know that our listeners as well have sort of been really fascinated by an insight, into your research and your sort of career as well. And I think it's really inspirational as well in terms of transitioning into the race walking and sort of doing really well. I mean, I suppose not everyone's going to go on and compete at the very highest level, but we can all be the best we can be, which is certainly a takeaway. We can all just aspire to be the best we can be. So it was great to have you on the show, Gemma. Great speaking to you, and wish you all the very best in what you do moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. That was Gemma Bridge, researcher and world-class athlete. No doubt about that, giving us insight into her research and also her career as an athlete, which has been really interesting, and no doubt we'll sort of keep an eye out to see how she gets on as an athlete, and also any updates on the research as well. So you're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing all the news from the local area and around.